Welcome back to another Beyond Clean Expert Series. You're watching the Chemical Safety Expert Series with Alex Hilliker. I am your host, Bobby Parker, and on today's episode, we will be looking at the new update to AAMI ST58. Now, AAMI ST58, that document that maybe you've heard of in your department, maybe you haven't, deals with chemical sterilization and high-level disinfection. Kind of like the ST79 of your department for low temp sterilization. Got a pretty significant update last year. So as we get started on this series through chemical safety, seems like a great place to start. Alex, welcome back to the show. Why don't we dive straight in? Why don't you tell us a little bit about what were some of those changes over the last update to ST58 for our departments?
Yeah, Bobby, good to be back. Let's jump right into it. So setting the context, as you mentioned, AAMI ST58 is the standard for chemical sterilization and high-level disinfection. It covers a lot of ground in the standard. It covers areas like work area design, personnel and staffing considerations, decontamination processes, and quality control, in addition to considerations for the safe and effective use of both liquid and gas chemical sterilants and high-level disinfectants. So it is a lot to cover. The working group that led the way on this update actually did a fantastic and very comprehensive job. They actually wanted a technical committee award for their efforts over 5 years of labor on this particular standard.
Nice.
And they really wanted to capture advances in the industry in terms of both technology and processes. And to do that effectively, of course, they had to get representation from both sterile processing technicians and leaders and also manufacturers, because this standard is so important for both of those groups and really across a wide variety of stakeholders as well. It helps to have a benchmark for chemical safety and efficacy. And I like to say that we're all on the same team when it comes to the safe and effective use of these chemicals in the department.
Yeah, well, it sounds like a big job. ST58 is a big document, just like ST79 is. I've used it before, and I've always kind of thought of it as kind of the chemical sterilization document. It didn't really pay a lot of attention to the chemical safety pieces in there. And so I'm sure there were some changes to the chemical safety portion of it. Why don't you tell us a little bit about some of those chemical safety portions and what's in there in the newest update?
Yeah, first and foremost, one major change, and that's that ST58 supersedes ST41, which is the now retired standard for ethylene oxide use in chemical sterilization for sterile processing departments. So ST58 now provides a very comprehensive overview of the safe and effective use of ETO for the hospitals that are still using it, and there are a few out there, including the design, the ventilation requirements, and the monitoring considerations for using ETO. The second big change is that there's now appendices that are specific to the safe and effective use of peracetic acid as a high-level disinfectant and hydrogen peroxide as a chemical sterilant. So AAMI encourages SPD staff to review the safety data sheets for the chemicals that are being used, and also to consult with the suppliers of those chemicals, the manufacturers of the sterilizers, and critically, the manufacturers of the gas monitoring equipment to help satisfy the requirement to provide a safe working environment for your team members. For hydrogen peroxide in particular, AAMI specifically recommends vapor monitoring if there's the potential for hydrogen peroxide vapor concentration to exceed the OSHA recommended permissible exposure limit. We're going to talk a lot more about that in some upcoming episodes. But suffice to say, there is the potential to exceed the permissible exposure limit more often than you might think. There's also a brand new gas and vapor monitoring annex. It's Annex P. AAMI in that annex states that even if the healthcare facility is not specifically required by law to monitor for vapor concentrations in the department, that OSHA can enforce its permissible exposure limits by means of the General Duty Clause. And the General Duty Clause is something that we talk about in chemical safety quite a bit. It's the OSHA clause that mandates employers to provide a workplace that is free from recognized hazards that are likely to cause death or serious physical harm to employees. It also says that OSHA typically uses other common and accepted standards like the American Conference for Governmental Industrial Hygienists, who put out threshold limit values to determine whether the exposures are deemed harmful, and that monitoring can be used to demonstrate compliance with accepted exposure standards. So I told you there was a lot to cover. There's kind of one more piece that I'd like to point out. AAMI actually, for the first time, describes the ideal vapor monitor, which is really helpful for SPD technicians and leaders. So it lays out relevant characteristics like that it would accurately measure vapor concentrations, it would be easy to use, it would be specific to limit cross sensitivities, and that it would give a continuous and instantaneous reading. So to sum it up, very big picture, AAMI really says that all managers of locations where these chemicals are being used have clearly defined responsibilities to monitor and minimize worker exposure to these chemical vapors.
Sure. All right. I'm going to do my best to summarize here because you covered a lot. So you mentioned hydrogen peroxide and peracetic acid are dealt with specifically about how to handle them safely. The requirements for monitoring under the OSHA General Duty Clause, and then also goes a step further to describe what that monitoring looks like specifically. So I guess my question would be then, as they did this deep dive on technology, what's the rationale behind going to that nth degree of describing specifically how the monitoring should take place instead of just saying, hey, you should keep an eye on this?
Yeah, there's really three primary points that AAMI uses as their rationale for these changes. The first, and this is repeated several times throughout the standard, is that odor is an unreliable indicator of chemical safety in the department. You cannot rely on smell alone to ensure that that your team members are safe. And there's a couple of reasons for that. When we talk about hydrogen peroxide at very low concentrations, it has almost no odor. So if you can't smell the chemical, you don't know if you're being exposed to it in levels that would be deemed unsafe per OSHA.
Right.
The second, and we'll get into this later as well, peracetic acid definitely does have a serious odor. When you worked around PAA, you've worked around PAA because of the sharp, pungent vinegar-like odor. The problem with that is our noses are not calibrated in parts per million to determine if we're being safely exposed.
How smelly is too smelly? Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The second piece of rationale that AAMI provides is that sterilizers can and sometimes do fail. Again, this is also repeated throughout the standard several times. Generally speaking, the equipment that is used today is engineered to a very, very high standard for both efficacy and safety. But things happen, right? Just like a car breaks down or a furnace breaks or an oven breaks, right? AAMI suggests that we should account for these possibilities and eventualities to make sure that we're keeping our teams safe in the event of the unexpected. And then third and finally, the technology exists to continuously monitor effectively for worker safety. We live in a world of technology with instant feedback, and AAMI is really suggesting that should apply to worker safety from chemical exposure as well.
Lots of updates to cover to this new standard, but that's going to do it for today's installment of the Beyond Clean Expert Series. If you have more questions about chemical safety, or like me, maybe have more questions than answers about the new AAMI ST58 document, I'd encourage you to reach out directly to Alex. You can find his contact information in the description down below. If you've been enjoying this series, you can find the full release of this series up to the recording date on beyondclean.net. So stay tuned with us for the next episode releasing each month. And until we talk to you again next time, keep fighting dirty.